This week on Quadriga, refugee crisis. Did Merkel get it wrong? Germany has welcomed thousands fleeing conflict and repression with open arms. Chancellor Angela Merkel was a leading voice in offering safe haven. But her government has now reintroduced border controls. Other European countries have followed Germany's example. Why this sudden U-turn? Did Chancellor Merkel get it wrong? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Was the Chancellor's inconsistency over the past couple of weeks a sign of failed leadership? That's what we want to talk about on Quadriga with three guests who've been following the refugee crisis very closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Mekonnen Mesghena. He's an expert on migration and diversity at the Heinrich Böll Foundation here in Berlin. And he says Merkel may not have a plan, but she has shown humanity and leadership. And Andreas Kluth is with us. He's the Berlin bureau chief of The Economist, and he believes there is a real risk that Europe could fail at the biggest humanitarian challenge it has ever faced. And finally, we're very pleased to welcome Burkhard Birke. He's a correspondent for the German radio broadcaster Deutschland Radio. He has reported in the past from Washington, Brussels, London, and Paris. And he says, for the first time since governing this country, Angela Merkel has been unequivocally stating her position. There is no alternative to receiving political refugees. So welcome to all of you. Mekonnen, interesting that you referred to leadership. The fact is the Chancellor's actions have been quite inconsistent. One weekend she's welcoming unregistered refugees. The next weekend she's reimposing border controls. Is that really leadership?
Well, Angela Merkel reacted at a point that there was a big humanitarian crisis in on the EU border areas of Hungary, Greece, Serbia, etc. And the pressure was very big. So at that moment, there is no alternative than to react. So we had a situation, all these situations during the last years in Greece, in Italy, in Spain. And since Germany is in a comfort zone, geographically in a comfort zone, it was not under pressure to deal with that. At a point, other European countries were dealing with Dublin regulations, etc., and we were just receiving those who penetrate all these borders. Now, the pressure was right behind the own borders. So at that point, Angela Merkel has to react, and she reacted, and she showed what Europe is capable to do. And I think, yes, there was no plan, that's what I think, but still, there was no other alternative. And at that moment, she showed a humanitarian gesture to the people, especially to people from Syria who are under stress, and giving them the opportunity to find an asylum.
So I guess you're suggesting that in a situation this fluid, this quickly developing, perhaps leadership sometimes does require a bit of trial and error?
Yes, of course. I mean, we are facing difficulties. Germany is going to face even more difficulties during the coming months and years, perhaps, I'm afraid. But still, it doesn't make the decision wrong.
Andreas Kluth, the critics, and there are a number of them here in Germany, they want to lay the blame for the chaos that we're seeing at the moment squarely at the Chancellor's doorstep, saying those encampments of refugees now with nowhere to go, the fact that the EU system of free travel between countries seems to be breaking down. They want to say all of that is very much due to the fact that the Chancellor got it wrong. Now, until last week, your magazine was commending Merkel for her actions in the refugee crisis in language so enthusiastic. We've really never heard it coming from The Economist before. Are they changing the tune now?
Well, it's out of character for The Economist to be that enthusiastic about Merkel, but that's because we've been focused on the Euro crisis. We were enthusiastic when it came to the Ukraine crisis. In this crisis, we're beside ourselves with joy and enthusiasm.
But still today, after?
Yes, I mean, tonight, tomorrow, the new magazine will be essentially doubling up on that. She is finally showing the leadership that The Economist and many, many other, especially Anglo-Saxon observers, have been demanding from Germany in general and from Angela Merkel in particular. And I think I was just talking to somebody who said Merkel has really, in her entire political career, made two spontaneous decisions. One was following Fukushima to exit nuclear energy. She felt that had to be done. And this is the second, that she felt this was from humanitarian and ethical reasons, the only, not the right, the only thing to do. And because normally, as you're probably aware, she's accused of leading from the back, hanging back, seeing where does the debate go, and then right at the end, suddenly running to the front of the queue. And that's not really leadership. But on these two issues, and especially this one on humanitarian, I think you've got the sense that damn the torpedoes, damn the critics in Europe and at home in the coalition, and just do the right thing. And I think that is impressive.
Several of you in your opening statements referred to her sense of conviction. We have a soundbite from this week after the decision was taken to reimpose border controls, in which she still very firmly defends that decision that she took the week before that to let the refugees in. Let's listen to what she had to say.
The world said it's a beautiful gesture. It came straight from the hearts of the people. I have to be honest, if we now have to start apologising for showing a friendly face in an emergency, then that is not my country.
Dann ist das nicht mein Land.
Burkhard Birke, the Chancellor has faced a lot of criticism for her humanitarian gesture 2 weeks ago from German media, saying it was naive. But don't words like that, the words that we just heard, don't they send a strong signal about Germany's values, both abroad but also right here at home?
And a very necessary signal, because we should not forget the pictures that made the news in all the world of 300 homes for asylum seekers being burned up by the new right, by Nazis, neo-Nazis. So she's sending out the right signal, and she's also pointing to the deficits of the European policy, because Dublin, the asylum rules, how to treat asylum seekers, they're not being respected. They haven't been respected for a long time by Italy, by others. And now she says, we are welcoming those refugees, those who really need political asylum. But she also has to control the influx, because there's so many people knocking at the door, and she has the task to control the influx, because it won't be unmanageable. So there is no contradiction between having border controls on the one side and saying you're all welcome in principle, but she's trying to force also the other European Union countries into an agreement, into solidarity.
Both of the other guests have said that they do see her exercising leadership, even if it sometimes is inconsistent to appearances. How do you see it? Is there adequate leadership here?
Definitely. I mean, that is one example where she's so secure in her position. Her party, the CDU, the Christian Democrats, they know she's the only bet to win the next election, for sure. She's very popular, and now she feels free to really say what she thinks. I think so. That's her conviction. She's from East Germany. There were a lot of people, refugees from East Germany to West Germany. That's our history. We shouldn't forget that. And this is what surprised me, by the way, about Hungary. 1956, we had thousands and thousands of Hungarians being welcome in Austria, in Germany, and now they're forgetting about this solidarity. That's a very, very poor picture they're given.
Nonetheless, of course, there are many critics here in Germany who are saying the country has taken on more than it can handle. Let's take a closer look at the decisions and the actions of the past few weeks.
For a long time, Chancellor Merkel had little to say about the migrant crisis and attacks on asylum shelters. When she finally spoke, Merkel praised those who helped refugees and promised to take in anyone fleeing conflict, at least those able to make the perilous boat crossing and through Hungary's barbed wire fence. Germany quickly became a promised land for thousands dreaming of a better life. Many German people were very willing to help. The new arrivals were greeted with smiles all round, even by the authorities. But those scenes were short-lived. Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière soon reintroduced border controls. He and other leading politicians warned that Germany was being stretched to the limit. Is Germany rolling up the welcome mat? Are thousands now destined to be stuck in no man's land on EU's borders?
The Mekonnen Mesghena, going back to those words of the Chancellor when she said, we're going to take them in, we're going to make an exception to the rule and let unregistered refugees in a couple of weeks ago. The critics, as I said that they just are a gesture of terrible naivete and that they basically function as a carte blanche invitation to refugees to say, just put everything down and head to Germany. Now, for you as a migration expert, is that plausible? To what extent are refugees from Syria, the vast majority, of course, coming through Hungary, are Syrian? To what extent are they actually going to change their destination with a couple of weeks' notice and all head to Germany? Is it a pull factor being exercised by Germany or something else?
Well, humanitarian gesture, humanitarian politics may be a signal to refugees to show them that you may find refuge, you may find protection, yes. But this argument, you know, I have been hearing this argument for the last many, many years, like saving lives at the Mediterranean Sea, for example. Italy did a bold action last year. And then it was saving, the country was saving ten thousands of people from drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. So Italy was criticized for that gesture, and we applauded from the European side because we didn't want to have all these deaths and tragedies in the Mediterranean Sea. So depending on which frontier we are looking at, there are always certain humanitarian gestures. And that the criticism has been always, this is an invitation for more refugees to come. But the question is, do we have any other option when we have to save lives? Do we have any other option? By the way, all the refugees who came in during the last years, the last weeks, they were already on their way. They were knocking at the European doors. So, you know, we may see the effect of this friendly gesture and the humanitarian gesture of Angela Merkel and the German society, of course. But at the end of the day, the issue is how do we deal? We need a bigger plan. We need a master plan to deal with the immigration issues and refugee issues and not look into details. How do we handle, how do we deal with individuals or with a certain group of refugees who are knocking at our doors? This is not a politics. Politics is a bigger picture.
I want to look in a minute at the European master plan or lack of one, but let's first talk about that report's question at the end about whether Germany's welcome culture is at an end. Burkhard Birke, does last weekend's decision to reimpose border controls amount to Germany turning its back on the refugees?
No, I wouldn't say turning the back on the refugees, but trying to control the influx because you've got to keep it manageable. Let's take our migration offices. They got new staff. They got 1,000 new staff by the legislation, and they've already employed 617 since July. But they need to be trained. I mean, the head of the office, who just resigned, said, we are not just controlling cinema cards. We are deciding on human lives. So these people need to be trained. And there is where politics really failed, because it was clear that the number of refugees would at least double this year. Now it's tripled or quadrupled. So we could have recruited people much earlier. And now we need to take the flow steady, we need to control it, and we need to take fast decisions. And you've got to also make a distinction between those people who come for economical reasons and those who come for political reasons, really looking for protection. And a third of all the people who ask for asylum here are not here for political reasons. They're obviously here for economical reasons, and there are pull factors having these benefits, and they need to be coordinated, harmonized on a European level.
As Burkhard Birke just pointed out, the head of the Agency for Migration here in Germany resigned today, Andreas Kluth, saying personal reasons were the reason. But in fact, there are 360,000 unprocessed applications for asylum. Clearly, the authorities completely overwhelmed here. Can Germany handle the challenge?
Well, apparently, Mr. Schmidt is not the first person in history to resign to spend more time with the family. I think I've never heard of another reason why one resigns, really. They're clearly overwhelmed. That's out of the question. But also, I wouldn't necessarily be quick to blame any particular bureaucrat, because these numbers took all of us by surprise. If you recall, as of this week, we are estimating 1 million coming to Germany this year. 1 month ago, it was 800,000. And I think up to that point, it was something like 400-something thousand. So we're all taken by a surprise. And now we have to deal with this. And as you said, we're dealing with human beings. So I'm trying to go slow on blaming the bureaucrats so fast. I think what's encouraging and what to me is the greatest suspense going forward inside Germany, as opposed to at the European level, is whether popular opinion, whether the Willkommenskultur, this welcome culture, holds up. And I think what you've seen this year is that we had, and I'll say the word Heidenau, that's the place in Saxony, among many other places where there were fire bombings and riots against. So you had this, as the president called it, the dark Germany, but it's clear that the bright Germany, the light Germany, has totally overwhelmed the dark Germany. And I just saw an interesting poll the other day, a new poll taken after Merkel's spontaneous decision to let in the trains. 66% of Germans think that is right, even though 84% of Germans think that will, which is true, draw even more refugees to come, because once one family member is here, the others will follow. So if 2/3 of Germans are behind Merkel on this, that is extremely encouraging.
We need all the flexibility in the world, because that's what she's asking the Germans to be, what they are not, flexible. And it's going to be a strain for every one of us to be so flexible to welcome those people, which we need for our economy.
Mekonnen Mesghena, the light Germany triumphing over the dark Germany. Are you really as optimistic as Andreas Kluth? We've heard about the strains on local communities trying to find housing and shelter and financial support for all of these refugees. Could the welcome culture at some point tip into xenophobia?
Let me just add one point. I mean, 2/3 of the German population is behind Merkel. I wouldn't like to imagine what it would have been happened if it was an SPD chancellor or even a Green chancellor letting so many refugees into the country. So there's a quality in the setting. She is a conservative, a Christian Democrat chancellor doing this. So, you know, if it would have been somebody else, we'd have a total different picture in the country, first of all. The second thing is, I wouldn't say it would backlash, because if we have a political leadership, a very strong leadership, sending clear signals to the society, we can manage that. And that's what Merkel has been saying all the time. Yes, it's a big number. Yes, it's difficult, but we're going to manage it. So this is a very important and strong signal and message to the society. If we have a backlash, if politicians are going to instrumentalize the number of refugees, etc., then of course we will have a backlash.
So speaking of signals, if there is a common denominator between the two decisions taken by the German government, namely, first of all, the decision to let the unregistered refugees in and then the decision to reimpose border controls, surely it is that both were, in a way, a signal to European partners that the system of asylum in Europe is broken. The question is, has the signal been received?
The scenes in Italy and Greece shocked the world. But appeals for help from countries on the front line of the crisis initially went unheard by Germany and others. They insisted the Dublin Agreement be observed. It states that asylum seekers be registered in the first EU country they arrive in. With its borders open, Germany estimated up to 1 million people could arrive this year alone. Berlin then proposed a mandatory quota system, which it had initially been unwilling to grant Italy and Greece. Can Germany really be an honest broker for the fair and equal distribution of migrants throughout Europe?
Burkhard Birke, a signal to the other European partners, this system is not broken, it needs to be fixed. But is the signal falling on deaf ears?
Apparently, yes. But, I mean, if we are capable of having extra summits on the EU level to finance 86 billion for Greece, then we should be able to get out a couple of billion and a couple of quotas for the refugees. I mean, there's urgency, and Europe needs to harmonize its standards, harmonize its asylum procedures, decide on a quota. There needs to be solidarity and have a plan for the Balkans and for Syria and for the refugee camps in Lebanon and in Turkey to support these, because many of these refugees came because there's not enough food, there's not dignity in the conditions of living in those refugee camps there, so they're coming to where there are decent conditions. So there needs to be an emergency action plan by the European Union and a summit, decided by a summit.
Andreas Kluth, your magazine has had some very sharp words for the Eastern European countries who have said repeatedly, hey, you know what? This isn't our problem. This is Germany's problem.
Yes, I mean, the Eastern countries, I think led by Hungary's bizarre behavior, bizarre as an understatement, with barbed wire, mustard gas, and so forth at the moment. And then the other Visegrad countries, and that's Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, and the Baltics. They're all they have historical reasons for that. These ex-communist countries you see within Germany. It's also the ex-communist eastern part that struggles more to both with accepting many foreigners and for the complex, psychology of having just liberated themselves from communism, and now suddenly there's a sense of things going in a different direction. That's understandable, but they're wrong to feel that way. And also in the other crises that Europe faces, for instance, vis-a-vis Vladimir Putin, these countries want solidarity from the West, and Merkel has been helping them there. Now they're on the other side, and there are really two camps. There is the central, I don't want to call it axis, but there's Sweden, Germany, Austria, which are essentially have a welcome culture. Then there's the East, which is struggling and against. And there's also France and Britain and the other countries that are waiting to see which way it goes, but are also certainly not leading and not playing a good role. And we are just as hard on the Easterners as on the UK and France. France is actually supporting the German-Austrian effort for quotas Europe-wide. But that is what must happen, and that's the next step that Mrs. Merkel must take in her leadership. She must organize this Europe-wide response, otherwise this will not happen. And that's what I had in mind when I said Europe could actually fail at this humanitarian crisis.
What would that mean, failure, Mekonnen Mesghena? We've got possibly up to 1 million asylum seekers just entering Germany alone this year. If we don't find a quota system to distribute refugees across Europe, what happens then?
I'm not quite sure whether quota system would work at the end of the day, because what do we do? I mean, people are not goods. You can't shift them from here to there. That's the one thing. The other thing is, if countries like Hungary, Greece, Poland, and so on are not willing to accept refugees and give protection to people in need of refuge and keep their standards below the European level, then you have a big humanitarian crisis and problem on the other side. So what do? I mean, you need a coalition of the goodwill, perhaps. You need another level of leadership. I mean, Merkel's signal of leadership is not only towards to the nation, but also it's towards the Europe as well. She's shown a big gesture, and she put Europe into other perspective for non-Europeans. So what we need is even more leadership beyond Merkel. We need the coalition of those who are willing to deal with to tackle the issue. And Sweden, you mentioned, Andreas, Sweden, and most probably other countries like Spain, Italy, etc., etc. So how do we manage to share the burden, but also to be more coordinated in our humanitarian gesture?
So our title talked about getting it right, a coalition of the willing, perhaps part of that. Burkhard Birke, if the Chancellor were to try to get it right proactively, looking forward from here, could that mean a more proactive role for Germany in trying, for example, to get peace in Syria?
Definitely, and I think we have a window of opportunity, just as we got the Iran nuclear deal, and we all know that these powers, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Russia, they're all involved in Syria. So now that we opened the door to Iran, we should open the door to talks, to get a round table together, to really find one some kind of a solution for Syria, because unless we get this conflict solved, I mean, there's going to be a constant influx of refugees into the European Union.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing is, how do we keep the push factors from the other side? I mean, what's the role of the West in the economic deprivation of people leaving their homes?
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for joining in. See you soon.